It's wonderful to see you all again. I've got an extraordinary tale to tell you today.
Hand over the keys, Sienna Vance snapped, her voice cutting through the soft string quartet music on the terrace. You don't look like you belong in a car like this anyway, Elena. Elena Vance didn't flinch. She kept her fingers wrapped around the glass of sparkling water, watching the way the condensation beaded and rolled down the side, cold and honest against her palm. Around them, the elite of the city milled about her mother's estate, their hushed conversations and the clink of crystal creating a symphony of unearned privilege. Sienna stood there, a vision in silk and arrogance. Her dress probably cost more than Elena's monthly salary at the accounting firm, and she wore her entitlement like a crown. She didn't just want the keys, she wanted the audience. She glanced sideways, ensuring that Julian Thorne and a small circle of their socialite friends were watching the performance. I'm serious, Sienna continued, her laughter light and melodic, designed to mask the cruelty of her words. The valet is confused. He thinks the silver Porsche belongs to someone important. It's embarrassing for everyone if you're the one who climbs into the driver's seat in those sensible shoes. Julian Thorne stepped forward, placing a possessive hand on Sienna's waist. He offered Elena a pitying smile that didn't reach his eyes. She's right, Elena. It's a high-performance machine. It's wasted on a commute to a cubicle. Besides, Sienna has a brand to maintain. Think of the followers. Elena looked at her sister. Sienna's perfume, a heavy, cloying scent of oud and roses, filled the air between them, thick enough to choke on. For years, Elena had played the role of the quiet sister, the charity case who stayed in the shadows while Sienna built a digital empire on a foundation of lies. No one in this circle knew that the sensible clerk they mocked spent her days unpicking the very threads of financial fraud that funded the silk on Sienna's back. The car is in my name, Sienna, Elena said, her voice low and steady. In your name, but bought with family legacy, Beatrice Vance interjected, appearing from the crowd like a specter of disapproval. The matriarch of the Vance family didn't look at Elena. Her eyes were fixed on her golden child. Elena, don't be difficult. Your sister is the face of this family. If she needs the car for the weekend gala, you should be happy to support her. Your life is smaller. You can take a rideshare. The sting of her mother's dismissal was familiar, a dull ache Elena had learned to live with. She saw the triumphant spark in Sienna's eyes. It was the look of a predator who knew the pack was on her side. Is that what this is? Elena asked, her gaze shifting to Julian. Supporting the family? It's about optics, Julian said, his tone dismissive. Something you wouldn't understand. Elena reached into her modest leather bag. Her fingers brushed against a slim, encrypted flash drive. The secret power she had been cultivating for 6 months. On that drive were the forensic trails of 3 shell companies Sienna and Julian had used to siphon funds from the family trust. They thought they were being clever, hiding behind complex layers of digital obfuscation. They didn't realize that Elena Vance was the one the big banks called when they needed to find a ghost. She pulled out the keys. The silver fob caught the afternoon sun, glinting like a blade. Fine, Elena said. She held them out, but as Sienna reached for them, Elena let them drop. The keys hit the marble tile with a sharp, metallic ring that silenced the nearby conversation. Sienna's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. She had to stoop, bending low in her tight dress to retrieve them from Elena's feet. It was a small win, a minor ripple in the pond, but the humiliation in Sienna's eyes was delicious. You're a bitter little mouse, Elena, Sienna hissed as she straightened up, clutching the keys. And you'll always be one. Enjoy the drive, Elena replied, her voice devoid of emotion. Make sure you check the mirrors. You never know who's following you. Sienna scoffed, turning on her designer heels and marching toward the driveway, Julian trailing behind her like a loyal dog. Beatrice gave Elena a look of profound disappointment before drifting back to her guests, leaving Elena alone on the edge of the terrace. Elena took a slow sip of her water. The cold liquid soothed the heat in her chest. She looked out over the manicured lawn toward the gates where the silver Porsche was already roaring to life. She pulled her phone from her pocket and tapped a single contact. "Read," a voice answered on the first ring. "It's Elena," she said, her eyes fixed on the retreating car. "I'm ready to hand over the first set of logs. The identity theft is just the tip of the iceberg. Julian is moving the money tonight." "Are you sure you want to do this?" Detective Marcus Reed asked. "Once the audit goes to the board, there's no pulling it back. It'll destroy them." Elena watched the dust settle where the car had been. She thought about the keys on the floor, her mother's dismissal, and the years of being the invisible support for a sister who would step on her neck for a few thousand likes. "I'm not pulling it back," Elena said, her voice as cold as the ice in her glass. "The countdown to the gala starts now. They have exactly 14 days of luxury left. Let them enjoy every second of it." She hung up and turned back toward the party, a ghost moving among the living, waiting for the moment the haunting would begin. The next morning, the Vance estate smelled of expensive hypocrisy and burnt sage. Elena stood in the sun-drenched kitchen, her fingers curled around a lukewarm mug of coffee as she watched Sienna Vance film An Authentic Mourning, real for her 3 million followers. Sienna looked radiant in a silk robe that Elena recognized, mainly because the charge for it had appeared on Elena's credit statement 3 weeks ago, disguised as a business expense. Sienna twirled for the camera, her heavy gold bracelets clinking like a cash register. "And remember, babes," Sienna chirped into her ring light, "success isn't given. It's earned through hustle and staying true to your brand." She cut the recording and the smile vanished instantly. She tossed her phone onto the marble island and glared at Elena. "Are you just going to stand there? The catering coordinator for the gala is arriving in 10 minutes and the foyer looks like a mid-range hotel. Go polish the silver in the dining room, and for heaven's sake, put on an apron. You look like a common clerk." "I am a clerk, Sienna," Elena said, her voice a flat, practiced neutral. "That's what you tell everyone, isn't it?" "Don't be pedantic," Sienna snapped, reaching for a green juice. "You're a Vance. Even if you lack the ambition to actually do something with the name, you can at least look the part of someone who belongs in this house." Beatrice Vance drifted into the room then, her sharp eyes scanning the kitchen for imperfections. She stopped by Sienna, smoothing a stray hair on her favorite daughter's head. "She's right, Elena. We have a reputation to maintain, especially with the Thorn Industries gala only 13 days away. Julian is expecting everything to be perfect. If you can't contribute financially to this family, the least you can do is be useful." The bitterness of the coffee tasted like ash in Elena's mouth. This was the routine, the systematic erasure of her worth by the people who were currently living off her stolen identity. They saw a quiet, unassuming woman who spent her nights staring at spreadsheets. They didn't see the forensic auditor who had spent the last 6 hours mapping the digital trail Julian Thorne thought he had scrubbed clean. "I'll get to the silver," Elena said softly. She retreated to the dining room, but she didn't head for the sideboard. Instead, she slipped into the small study tucked behind the main staircase. The room was Julian's sanctuary, filled with the scent of old leather and the hum of a high-end server. Julian Thorne sat at the mahogany desk, his brow furrowed as he stared at a dual-monitor setup. He didn't even look up as Elena entered. To him, she was part of the furniture, a ghost in a modest blouse. "Elena, tell the girls I'm busy," Julian muttered, his fingers flying across the keys. "The encryption on these offshore logs is acting up. I need total silence." Elena felt a surge of cold adrenaline. She walked toward the bookshelf, pretending to straighten a row of leather-bound volumes, but her eyes were locked on his screen. Julian was arrogant, but he wasn't a technician. He was using a brute-force script she had written years ago for a mock security audit, unaware that the person who created the back door was standing 3 feet away. She watched the cursor blink. He was trying to move the final 4 million from the Vance Legacy Fund, a fund that existed only on paper and was tied directly to Elena's social security number. "Is something wrong, Julian?" she asked, her voice a soft lure. "Just a glitch," he grunted, frustrated. "The bank is asking for a secondary biometric verification. I'll have to bypass it manually tonight." He stood up, grabbing his blazer. "I have a meeting with Marcus Vane about the new development. Don't touch anything." As soon as the heavy oak door clicked shut, Elena moved. She didn't have much time. She pulled a slim, black flash drive from her pocket. The cold metal felt like a weapon in her palm. She slid it into the server's front port. The screen flickered. The keylogger she'd installed weeks ago had already captured his master password, but she needed more. She needed the routing numbers for the shell companies he was using to funnel the stolen wealth. The progress bar crawled forward. 10%, 30%. Outside, she heard the front door chime. The catering coordinator had arrived. Sienna's voice carried through the house, high and demanding, followed by the sharp click of her designer heels on the hardwood. She was heading toward the study. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. She wasn't just a clerk. She was the storm they hadn't seen coming. The bar hit 100%. She yanked the drive and slipped it into her bra just as the door handle turned. Sienna stood in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Elena standing by the desk. "What are you doing in here? I told you to stay in the dining room." Elena stepped away from the desk, her expression perfectly blank. "I thought I heard Julian call for me. He must have already left." Sienna scoffed, stepping into the room and checking her reflection in the darkened monitor. "Why would he call for you? He barely remembers you're in the room. Now, get out. The gala invitations are on the foyer table. I want them stamped and ready for the courier by noon." Elena nodded, moving past her sister. As she reached the door, she paused. 13 days, Sienna. It's going to be a night to remember." Sienna didn't even look back. "It's going to be the night I finally take my place at the top of this city. Now move, you're blocking the light." Elena walked into the foyer and looked at the stack of ivory envelopes. Each one was an invitation to a disaster Sienna and Julian had spent years building. She picked up the top one, feeling the embossed gold lettering under her thumb. The countdown hadn't just started. It was accelerating. And as she looked at the drive hidden against her skin, Elena knew she didn't just have the logs. She had the keys to their prison. 2 days later, the air in Detective Marcus Reed's office felt heavy with the scent of ozone and stale coffee. The low hum of a server rack in the corner provided a rhythmic backdrop to the revelation sitting on the desk between them. Marcus leaned back, his shadow stretching long against the frosted glass door, his expression uncharacteristically grim for a man who had spent a decade chasing ghosts in the financial system. He slid a thick, blue-bound folder across the scarred mahogany surface. Inside lay the certified results of the forensic audit Elena had initiated in secret. The digital trail didn't just lead to Julian Thorne's offshore accounts. It created a map of a systematic, 5-year execution of Elena's financial identity. Every signature on the shell company incorporations was a perfect, chilling replica of her own. Elena traced the edge of the paper, her fingers steady. She felt a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't just evidence of theft, it was a blueprint of her sister's soul. Sienna hadn't just taken the money, she had meticulously crafted a version of Elena that existed only to sign away her own future. "It's more than just the inheritance," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. "They've leveraged your name to secure high-interest loans for the Thorne Group. If this gala doesn't bring in the investors they're courting, the whole house of cards collapses. They aren't just stealing from you anymore, Elena. They're drowning you in their debt." Elena didn't flinch. She tucked the folder into her bag, the weight of it feeling like a weapon. "They think the gala is their salvation. They think it's the night they become untouchable. And you." "I'm the one who built the house," she replied, standing up. "I know exactly which brick to pull." As she stepped out of the precinct, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a social media post from Sienna. The video showed her sister in a high-end boutique, laughing as a tailor draped a shimmering, emerald-cut diamond necklace over her throat. The caption read, "A little early birthday gift to myself, because I'm worth the best." Elena recognized the necklace. It was a piece from their grandmother's collection that had been missing since the funeral. Sienna wasn't just buying new things. She was flaunting the heirlooms she'd stolen while Elena was still in mourning. A second text followed, direct and sharp. The dry cleaner messed up Julian's tuxedo. Be a dear and go fix it. You're already out, and God knows you have nothing better to do with your time. The rage was a familiar, simmering heat under Elena's ribs. She didn't reply. Instead, she drove back to the Vance estate, the tires crunching over the expensive white gravel of the driveway. Inside, the foyer smelled of lilies and expensive floor wax. Julian stood at the bottom of the grand staircase, checking his reflection in a gold leaf mirror. He looked up as Elena entered, his lip curling in a practiced sneer. He adjusted his silk tie, the casual arrogance of a man who believed he had already won radiating off him in waves. "You're late with those invitations, Elena," Julian said, checking his platinum watch. "Sienna is upstairs having a crisis because the florist sent white roses instead of cream. Go be useful. And for heaven's sake, change that coat. You look like a charity case wandering into a palace." He didn't wait for an answer, turning back to his reflection. He viewed her as furniture, a functional, invisible part of the background. It was his greatest mistake. Elena paused on the bottom step, her hand resting on the banister. The wood was cold under her palm. "I'll get right on that, Julian. I'm making sure everything is perfect for the big night. You wouldn't want any surprises." Julian laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "Surprises. The only surprise would be you actually showing some ambition for once. Now move. You're blocking the light." Elena climbed the stairs, her pace deliberate. She found Sienna in the master suite, surrounded by boxes of designer shoes and discarded silk. Her sister didn't even look up. She was too busy admiring the way the stolen diamonds caught the afternoon sun. "There you are," Sienna snapped, gesturing to a pile of tangled gold chains on her vanity. "Sort through these. I need the vintage pearls for the pre-gala brunch tomorrow, and don't scratch them with those rough hands of yours." Elena walked over to the vanity. She picked up a delicate gold bracelet, feeling the cool metal. She knew the serial number of this piece by heart. She had bought it for herself after her first successful audit years ago. Sienna had borrowed it and never returned it. "You seem very confident about the gala, Sienna," Elena said quietly. Sienna smirked, leaning closer to the mirror to check her eyeliner. "Why wouldn't I be? Julian has the investors lined up and the press is calling it the social event of the decade. By Monday, the Vance name will mean something again. Not the boring, dusty version you represent, but my version. Powerful. Elite." She turned, her eyes scanning Elena with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You should be grateful, really. You get to live in the glow of my success. Just try not to stand too close to the photographers. I don't want people thinking my sister is the help." Elena felt the flash drive in her pocket, a small, hard rectangle against her hip. She looked at her sister, the stolen jewelry, the borrowed life, the towering ego built on a foundation of lies. "I'll be exactly where I need to be, Sienna," Elena said, her voice like silk over steel. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Sienna dismissed her with a wave of her hand, already reaching for her phone to take a selfie. Elena walked out of the room and down the hall to her own small, cramped quarters. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. The countdown clock on the Thorn Group's internal server showed 48 hours until the gala. Elena began the final upload. She wasn't just preparing a report, she was preparing an execution. Every file, every forged signature, and every diverted cent was being queued for a public debut that would be broadcast to every screen in the ballroom. She looked out the window at the manicured lawn, the shadows of the trees stretching like claws across the grass. The architect's blueprint was complete. In 2 days, the house of cards wouldn't just fall, it would burn. And as the sun set, Elena knew she wasn't just the victim anymore. She was the storm. The morning before the gala arrived with a suffocating layer of humidity that seemed to cling to the polished marble floors of the Vance estate. Elena Vance stood in the sunroom, her fingers curled around a cup of jasmine tea that had long since gone cold. The house was a hive of frantic, shallow energy. Caterers moved like shadows in the periphery, and the rhythmic, metallic snip of a tailor's shears echoed from the grand foyer. Sienna Vance swept into the room 10 minutes later, a whirlwind of silk and entitlement. She didn't offer a greeting. Instead, She thrust a heavy garment bag toward Elena's chest. The cloying scent of Sienna's vanilla lily perfume hit Elena like a physical blow, sweet and rotting all at once. "Hold this," Sienna commanded, her voice vibrating with the casual cruelty she reserved for those she considered beneath her. "The seamstress is incompetent, and Julian is busy with the board. I need you to check the bustle while I'm on the pedestal. And don't get your boring office hands all over the lace." Elena took the bag, the weight of the 5-figure gown pulling at her shoulders. She followed her sister into the foyer, where a circular mirror reflected a life built on a foundation of stolen air. As Sienna stepped onto the velvet-topped dais, she looked at Elena's simple charcoal trousers and button-down shirt with a sneer that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You know, Elena, I almost feel bad for you," Sienna said, tilting her chin as the tailor began to pin the hem. "Spending your life in those gray cubicles auditing other people's successes, it must be exhausting to be so invisible." "I see things other people miss," Elena replied quietly. She knelt at the base of the pedestal, ostensibly to help with the fabric, but her eyes were fixed on the reflection of her own steady hands. "That's the nature of the job. You'd be surprised how much the invisible people actually hold in their hands." Sienna let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "What could you possibly hold? A stapler? A spreadsheet?" She shifted her weight suddenly, and the sharp, sudden bite of a sewing pin grazed Elena's thumb. A tiny bead of crimson bloomed against her skin. Sienna didn't apologize. She simply watched the blood with a look of detached amusement. "Be careful. That silk costs more than your annual salary. I'd hate for you to have to work the next 10 years just to pay for a stain." "Money is a funny thing," Elena said, her voice dropping to a level of crystalline calm that made the tailor pause. She stood up, wiping the blood onto a tissue and looking her sister directly in the eyes. "It has a way of returning to its rightful owner. You should enjoy the dress, Sienna. It's the most expensive thing you'll ever wear for free." Sienna's brow furrowed for a fraction of a second, the first hairline fracture in her mask of arrogance. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means that forensic truth is a patient hunter," Elena said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "The debt always comes due, usually right when the party is at its loudest." Before Sienna could snap back, Beatrice Vance entered the room, her heels clicking like a metronome against the stone. She didn't look at Elena. Her gaze was a laser beam of adoration, fixed solely on her golden child. "She looks like royalty, doesn't she, Elena?" Beatrice said, adjusting a stray lock of Sienna's hair. "Try not to look so morose. I know it's hard for you to see your sister achieving so much while you're stuck in that little auditing firm, but you really should try to be happy for her. Not everyone is born to lead." "I'm not morose, Mother," Elena said, stepping back into the shadows of the hallway. "I'm focused." Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a short, sharp pulse. She pulled it out, shielding the screen from view. A message from Detective Marcus Reed sat on the encrypted display. "Server links confirmed. The ballroom feed is slaved to your master file. 24 hours to go." Elena looked up at the three of them, the thief, the enabler, and the technical accomplice Julian Thorne, who was just then descending the stairs with a glass of scotch in his hand. They were laughing now, toasted by the morning sun, completely unaware that the floor beneath them had already been replaced with paper. "See you at the gala," Elena whispered, her voice lost in the noise of their self-congratulation. She turned and walked toward the back exit, the weight of the secret power she carried making her step lighter than it had been in years. She had given the warning. She had offered the mercy of a hint. They had chosen to laugh. Now all that remained was the gravity of the fall. She reached her car and sat in the silence, watching the digital clock on the dashboard tick forward. The countdown wasn't in days anymore. It was in heartbeats. The evening of the Empower Gala arrived with a suffocating humidity that even the industrial-grade cooling of the Grand Metropole Ballroom couldn't entirely suppress. Elena Vance stood in the shadow of a towering floral arrangement, watching the elite of the city filter into the space. The air was a thick cocktail of expensive lilies, floor wax, and the metallic tang of chilled champagne. Every few seconds, the heavy double doors would groan open, admitting another wave of guests draped in silk and arrogance. She adjusted the cuff of her sleeve, feeling the cool, hidden weight of the encrypted drive tucked into her wristlet. For years, she had been the ghost at these events. The dowdy sister, the clerical afterthought, the one who stayed late to reconcile the receipts while others toasted to their own brilliance. Tonight, the silence she had cultivated felt less like a cage and more like a cloak. At the center of the room, beneath a chandelier that dripped with enough crystal to fund a small hospital, Sienna Vance held court. She was a vision in shimmering gold sequins, her laughter cutting through the low thrum of the string quartet like a serrated blade. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who believed the floor existed only to support her weight. "Darling, you look positively exhausted," a voice drawled near Elena's ear. She didn't need to turn to recognize the sharp, citrus-heavy perfume of Beatrice Vance. Her mother appeared beside her, not to offer a greeting, but to adjust a stray hair on Elena's shoulder with a look of profound disappointment. "Try to stay near the back, Elena," Beatrice said, her eyes already tracking back to the golden glow of her younger daughter. "Sienna has several high-profile donors to impress tonight. We don't want any distractions. This is her night. Her empire is finally reaching the global stage." "Her empire," Elena repeated quietly. The words tasted like copper. "Exactly. Now go find Julian. He's hovering near the tech booth looking like he's lost a lung. Make yourself useful and get him a drink." Beatrice patted her arm, a gesture that felt more like a dismissal than an affection, and swept toward the center of the room to join the circle of admirers. Elena watched her go, her pulse a steady, rhythmic drumbeat in her ears. She didn't head for the bar. Instead, she navigated the perimeter of the room, weaving through the clusters of tuxedoed men and women dripping in diamonds. She spotted Marcus Vane standing near the ice sculpture, his expression one of polite boredom. As a high-end developer, he was the kind of whale Sienna had been hunting for months. When Elena passed him, their eyes met for a fraction of a second. She didn't stop, but she saw his gaze linger on her dress, a deep, midnight navy silk that was far too well cut for a simple clerk. It was a subtle signal, a crack in the persona she had worn for a decade. "Elena, there you are." Julian Thorne intercepted her near the velvet curtains of the stage. He looked frayed, his bow tie slightly crooked and a fine sheen of sweat on his forehead. He gripped a tablet as if it were a life raft. "The feed is live streaming to 3 million followers," Julian whispered, his voice shaking. "Sienna is demanding a perfect transition when she takes the stage. If the tech glitches, she'll have my head." "The tech won't glitch, Julian," Elena said, her voice dropping to a soothing, icy register. She reached out and straightened his tie, her fingers brushing the skin of his throat. He flinched slightly. "Everything is exactly where it needs to be. You've done your part." "The master file is slave to the main projector, isn't it?" Julian nodded fervently. "Just like you showed me. I don't know why you're being so helpful lately, but I appreciate it. Sienna, she's been under a lot of pressure." "I know exactly how much pressure she's under," Elena replied. She glanced past him to see Detective Marcus Reed standing by the exit, his arms crossed, looking every bit the security detail he was pretending to be. He gave her a single, sharp nod. The witnesses were in place. The trap was set. Suddenly, the music swelled, and the house lights dimmed. A spotlight snapped to the center of the stage, illuminating the podium. Sienna stepped into the light, the gold of her dress blinding under the high-intensity lamps. The room erupted in applause. She beamed, her teeth white and perfect, the very image of self-made success. She looked out over the crowd, her eyes skipping over Elena as if she were part of the furniture. "Thank you all for being here," Sienna's voice projected through the hidden speakers, warm and commanding. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating a brand. It's about celebrating the truth of what we can achieve when we refuse to let anyone hold us back." Elena felt a surge of cold adrenaline. She moved toward the back of the room, standing directly behind the soundboard where Julian sat. She reached into her clutch and felt the drive. Sienna leaned into the microphone, her smile widening as she prepared to launch into her keynote, the speech that would officially launch her international expansion. "They say that behind every great fortune, there is a secret, Tonight, I want to share mine with you. Elena leaned over Julian's shoulder, her breath ghosting against his ear. Now, Julian, switch to the primary media folder. Let's show them the secret. Julian, blinded by the stage lights and his own nerves, tapped the command on his tablet. He thought he was launching the sizzle reel of Sienna's humanitarian work. Elena watched the massive screen behind her sister. The countdown didn't appear. Instead, a single high-resolution image of a forensic audit report flickered into existence, followed by a zoomed-in shot of a forged signature. The room didn't go silent yet. People were still smiling, waiting for the transition. Sienna was still speaking, her back to the screen, unaware that the floor beneath her had just turned to glass. Elena stepped back into the shadows, her heart beating with a terrifying, beautiful clarity. She looked at the digital clock on the wall. 1 minute until the world realized who Sienna Vance really was. 1 minute until the sleeping lion finished its meal. Sienna remained center stage, bathed in a warm amber spotlight that made her sequins shimmer like dragon scales. She was mid-sentence, her voice amplified and honeyed, radiating the effortless confidence of a woman who believed the world existed solely to provide her with a backdrop. True leadership, she declared, her gaze sweeping over the elite crowd, is about transparency. It's about building a legacy that can withstand any scrutiny. She didn't hear the first ripple of murmurs. She didn't see Marcus Vane, the man she'd spent months courting for a multi-million-dollar partnership, suddenly set his glass down with a sharp, clinical click. The massive screen behind her was no longer displaying the polished montage of her charitable works. Instead, it showed a high-resolution scan of a wire transfer. $500,000 moved from the Vance estate to a shell company in the Caymans. Below it, the signature was zoomed in until the pixelated ink was unmistakable. It was Elena's name, written in Sienna's jagged, aggressive hand. Elena watched from the shadows of the sound booth, her fingers grazing the cool, brushed aluminum of the console. The scent of lilies from the stage arrangements drifted back to her, cloying and funereal. She felt a strange, detached calm. The trap hadn't just snapped shut, it had vanished the floor beneath her sister's feet. Sienna finally sensed the shift. The adoring silence of the room had curdled into something cold and jagged. She turned, her smile still plastered on her face, a pageant queen's reflex that died the moment her eyes hit the screen. The transformation was visceral. Sienna's jaw didn't just drop. It seemed to unhinge as the blood fled her skin, leaving her a ghastly, waxen gray under the unforgiving LEDs. Her eyes, usually sharpened with calculated charm, stretched into hollow orbs of panic, darting frantically across the rows of forensic data that stripped her life naked. Her chest hitched, a jagged, visible tremor rattling her designer-clad frame as her carefully painted lips parted in a silent, suffocating gasp. She looked less like a mogul and more like a cornered animal realizing the cage was electrified. "Julian!" Sienna's voice was a pathetic, thin reed, stripped of its microphone-enhanced power. She looked toward her husband, but Julian Thorne was already retreating. He stood at the edge of the stage, his face a mask of cowardice as he stared at his shoes, refusing to meet her eyes. In the front row, Beatrice Vance let her champagne flute slip. The crystal shattered against the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot, the sparkling wine spreading like a stain. She looked at the screen, then at her favorite daughter, her face twisting with a sudden, sharp realization of the shame that was about to swallow their name. Elena stepped out from the darkness, her heels clicking a steady, rhythmic cadence against the floor. The sound cut through the frantic whispering of the crowd. She walked to the edge of the stage, stopping just where the light began to bleed into the shadows. "You always said I was the invisible one, Sienna," Elena said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the vacuum of the room's shock, it carried to the very back row. "You told me that people like me were just footnotes in the stories of people like you." Sienna tried to speak, her hands clawing at the air as if she could pull the images off the screen. "Elena, this is a mistake, a glitch. Julian, fix it." "It's not a glitch. It's a forensic audit," Elena replied, her tone as clinical as the documents on display. She looked at Marcus Vane, who was already signaling for his coat, his expression one of pure professional loathing. She looked at the detectives standing near the exit, their eyes locked on the woman on stage. "The thing about footnotes, sister, is that they're where the real truth is hidden. You should have spent less time looking at your reflection and more time reading the fine print." Sienna reached out, a desperate, grasping motion, but Elena was already turning away. "Wait!" Sienna shrieked, the sound echoing off the high ceilings, raw and ugly. "You can't do this, I'm a Vance." Elena paused, looking back over her shoulder one last time. The light was fading as the projector timed out, leaving Sienna standing in a flickering, ghostly blue glow. "No," Elena said softly. "You're just a thief who ran out of shadows." She didn't stay to see the police move in. She didn't stay to watch her mother's tears or Julian's frantic excuses. Elena walked out of the gala hall and into the crisp night air, the heavy doors thudding shut behind her, sealing the chaos inside. For the first time in 5 years, the air tasted clean. 5 minutes had passed since the heavy oak doors of the gala had thudded shut, but the vibration of the music still hummed through the soles of Elena's shoes. The night air was biting, smelling of damp cedar and the ozone of an approaching storm. She stood at the edge of the circular driveway, watching as the rhythmic, pulsing blue and red lights of the police cruisers crested the hill, slicing through the darkness of the Vance estate. Detective Marcus Reed was the first to step out of the lead vehicle. He didn't look like the childhood friend she used to climb trees with. Tonight, he was all sharp angles and professional steel. He caught her eye, gave a single, somber nod, and led his team toward the side entrance. Elena didn't follow them immediately. She waited, feeling the weight of the silver flash drive in her coat pocket, the digital guillotine that had finally dropped. 10 minutes later, she was summoned back inside, not to the ballroom, but to the sterile, glass-walled security suite overlooking the foyer. The transition from the crisp night to the stifling, perfume-heavy air of the mansion felt like stepping back into a cage, but this time she held the keys. Sienna was already there, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. The mask didn't just slip, it disintegrated. Sienna's skin, usually glowing with expensive serums, had turned a sallow, sickly gray under the harsh LED lights. Her eyes, once sharp with calculated malice, were wide and glassy, darting around the room like a trapped animal. Her lower lip trembled uncontrollably, ruining the perfect line of her designer lipstick, and a thin sheen of sweat broke across her forehead, matting her perfectly styled hair into jagged clumps. The arrogant tilt of her chin had vanished, replaced by a frantic, jagged breathing that made her throat cord with tension. She looked decades older than the woman who had been laughing over champagne an hour ago. "This is a mistake," Sienna hissed, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She turned her head as Elena entered, her expression flickering with a desperate, ugly hope. "Elena, tell them you got the accounts mixed up. You were always so bad with numbers at home." "I'm a forensic auditor, Sienna," Elena said, her voice a cool, steady blade. "I don't get numbers mixed up. I follow them until they lead me to the person holding the pen." Julian Thorne stood in the corner, his face as pale as the silk tie he kept loosening. He wouldn't look at his wife. Every time Sienna reached for him, he flinched away, his eyes fixed on Marcus Reed. The enabler had finally realized that the ship was sinking, and he was looking for the nearest life raft. "Julian," Sienna shrieked, the sound raw and grating against the glass walls. "Do something, call the firm." "The firm is already here, Sienna," a new voice boomed. Marcus Vane stepped into the room, his presence commanding and cold. The high-end developer, who only an hour ago had been considering a multi-million-dollar partnership with Vance Creative, looked at Sienna with pure, unadulterated disgust. "I've spent the last 20 minutes on the phone with my legal team. Every contract we signed is being voided under the morality and fraud clauses. You didn't just steal from your sister, you tried to build a kingdom on my reputation." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant, muffled sound of the gala guests being ushered out of the building. "Elena Vance!" The door swung open and Beatrice Vance stormed in. She didn't look at the handcuffs on the table or the officers in the room. She looked straight at Elena, her face twisted in a mask of maternal outrage. "Have you any idea what you've done? The Vance name is being dragged through the mud. The press is already at the gates. You've destroyed your sister's life over a professional grudge." The rage spike hit Elena then, hot and sharp. "A grudge, Mother. She stole my identity. She emptied my savings to buy that Vance brand you love so much. She didn't just take my money. She took my life for 5 years." "She was building something," Beatrice snapped, her voice dripping with the same entitlement she had passed down to her favorite daughter. "You were always so quiet, so plain. Sienna has a gift. You should have been proud to support her success." Elena felt a strange, hollow click in her chest. The last thread of emotional debt she felt toward the woman who raised her finally snapped. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single, notarized document, sliding it across the polished mahogany table toward Beatrice. "What is this?" Beatrice demanded. "It's a seizure notice," Elena replied. "Since the Vance Creative Headquarters and your primary residence were both funded by the loans Sienna took out in my name, the bank has moved to freeze the assets. As of 10 minutes ago, this house is no longer yours. Neither is the car in the driveway." Beatrice's hand shook as she picked up the paper. Her eyes scanned the legal headers, the color draining from her cheeks until she looked as ghostly as Sienna. You're throwing your own mother onto the street?" "No," Elena said, standing up and smoothing her coat. "I'm auditing the family, and it turns out you're all in the red." She turned to Marcus Reed. "Is everything in order, Detective?" "We have the digital trail and the physical signatures, Elena," Reed said, his hand resting on the back of Sienna's chair. "The DA is already moving for a no-bail hearing given the flight risk." Sienna let out a low, keening moan, her forehead dropping to the table. The influencer who had lived for the camera couldn't even bear to look at the lens of the security feed. Elena didn't stay to watch the officers lift her sister up. She didn't stay to hear Julian's frantic attempts to trade information for immunity, or to listen to Beatrice's fading demands for decorum. She walked out of the room, her heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat on the marble floor. As she reached the foyer, she saw Marcus Vane waiting by the exit. He inclined his head, a gesture of genuine respect. "If you ever decide you want to work for someone who actually values the truth, Elena, call me." "I think I'm done working for other people for a while," she said, offering him a small, tight smile. She stepped out into the rain, which had finally begun to fall in heavy, cleansing sheets. She didn't look back at the lights of the mansion. She walked toward her modest car, the engine turning over with a reliable hum. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time in half a decade, she knew exactly who was behind the wheel. 6 months had passed since the rain washed the scent of jasmine and betrayal from Elena Vance's skin. The air in her new office was different, crisper, filled with the neutral aroma of fresh espresso and the faint, clean scent of expensive stationery. She sat behind a desk of reclaimed oak, the surface smooth and cool beneath her palms. There were no gilded frames here, no heavy velvet drapes to hide the shadows. Just floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over a city that finally felt like it belonged to her. A soft knock preceded Detective Marcus Reed, who stepped into the room with a cardboard tray of coffee. He looked younger without the weight of the Thorne investigation hanging over his shoulders. He set a cup in front of her, the steam curling into the quiet air. "You look like you actually slept last night," Reed noted, taking a seat in one of the minimalist leather chairs. Elena offered a small, genuine smile as she picked up a silver pen, feeling its balanced weight. "It's amazing how well you rest when you aren't waiting for the other shoe to drop. How is the aftermath handling the Thorne family?" Reed leaned back, his expression turning professional. "Julian Thorne took the plea deal 3 weeks ago. He's looking at 5 to 7 years for his part in the wire fraud. He sang like a bird the moment he realized the evidence you provided was airtight. He traded everything, his reputation, his marriage, and his remaining assets, just to avoid a double-digit sentence." Elena took a slow sip of her coffee, the heat grounding her. "And Sienna." "Sienna Vance is a different story," Reed said, his voice dropping an octave. She's still trying to play the victim. She's moved into a cramped studio apartment in the garment district, the kind of place she used to mock from the window of her town car. Her influencer accounts were seized as proceeds of crime, and her sponsors dropped her so fast it gave the industry whiplash. I saw her yesterday at the courthouse for her latest deposition. She was wearing a coat from a fast fashion outlet. The buttons were plastic, and the hem was frayed. The image of her sister in cheap polyester, stripped of the designer armor she'd stolen, should have brought Elena a surge of triumph. Instead, she felt a hollow, clinical satisfaction. The face slap hadn't been a single moment of impact. It was the slow, agonizing friction of a life built on lies finally grinding to a halt. Sienna was no longer the queen of a fake empire. She was a woman whose face was a warning to others, a cautionary tale whispered in the very boardrooms she once tried to dominate. "She asked about you," Reed added tentatively. "She wanted to know if you were going to help with her legal fees. She actually had the audacity to say that family sticks together during the hard times." Elena's grip tightened on her pen. The audacity was a terminal condition with Sienna. Family sticks together when there's a foundation of truth. She didn't want a sister. She wanted a bank account she could bleed dry. Tell her I'm busy auditing the lives of people who actually deserve a second chance. Reed nodded, his respect for her boundaries evident. He stood to leave, pausing at the door. "By the way, Marcus Vane sent over that contract for the audit of his new development. He said he doesn't trust anyone else to find the cracks in the foundation. I'll have it on his desk by Monday," she replied. When the door clicked shut, the silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy with the cost of her victory. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a single cream-colored envelope. It was a letter from Beatrice Vance, sent a month ago. She didn't need to open it to know what it said. Her mother's handwriting on the front was shaky, the ink blurred in places. The last time they'd spoken, Beatrice had screamed that Elena had destroyed the family by exposing the truth. To her mother, a beautiful lie was always preferable to an ugly reality. Elena had lost a mother and a sister in that mansion, but as she looked at the reflection of her own steady eyes in the window, she knew she'd finally found herself. She stood up and walked to the glass, watching the rhythmic pulse of the city below. In the distance, she could see the silhouette of the Thorne estate, now tied up in probate and stripped of its luster. It looked small from here, like a dollhouse where children played at being important. She turned her back on the view, picked up her pen, and began to work. The road ahead was long, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't just a passenger in someone else's heist. She was the architect of her own future, and the foundation was solid.
I hope you enjoyed this tale. Please subscribe to support the channel. Goodbye for now.